Welcome and welcome back to another panel at Virtual Monsterama 2020. My name is Darren Bush. I am the co-director of the media track this year for Virtual Monsterama. We are going to be talking about turning horror into gaming and turning gaming into art. And we'll explain what that mysterious title means in just a couple of minutes. But first, I want to let our esteemed panelists and artists introduce themselves to the Monsterama audience. Shannon, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shannon Sturchy. I've been doing Monsterama since 2016 every year in person, obviously not happening in person this year. I have a YouTube channel where I make video essays and review horror media and stuff like that at Sturchy Movies. I am a player on the teenage superhero body horror podcast Critical Bits, which Joel runs. I'm the film correspondent for the podcast Struggle Session, and I'm the editor for the upcoming body horror tabletop zine Inside Out as well. So I do a bunch of spooky stuff.
Yes, all right, excellent. A thick resume. We like that here at Monsterama. So Joel, would you please introduce yourself? It is a lot, but it gives people options. I like that. Joel, welcome.
Hi, yeah, I'm Joel Rees. I am the editor and one of the hosts of Critical Bits and the Actual Play podcast. I also am an independent filmmaker. I co-produced a movie that's doing a festival circuit right now called it's a new title. It's 15 reasons or 15 reasons to hunting Bigfoot. I forget. It used to be called Vice's Guide to Hunting Bigfoot. It just literally the title just got changed. But I'm a co-producer on that. Big fan of horror, and then I've done short filmmaking for years and focused a lot on comedy. And over the last couple of years, I've been kind of shifting to more of a comedy with a horror aspect.
Excellent. And I'm still Darren M. Bush. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. For those of you who've been watching the lit and media panels here at Monsterama this year, you might notice I'm about to get out of my depth a little bit, but that's good for me. So what we're talking about today for the next almost hour is the trend over the last few decades, to turn horror media and literature into games. And what I've noticed recently, and these two wonderful people are directly involved in, is taking the horror gaming and turning horror gaming genres and turn them back into other forms of art, which we'll get into that soon enough. So let me start with this. Joel, what was your first experience with horror gaming?
Ooh, horror game. I think Resident Evil probably, as far as for video games.
That counts.
And then as far as tabletop, it wasn't. I think probably Vampire, Dark Ages. I feel because I did play some Masquerade, but I feel as far as a game with some real horror setting, Vampire Dark Ages was kind of that. But for horror game, I think those would be kind of my introductory points.
Shannon, how about you? Where did you start with horror gaming?
Definitely Silent Hill 2. When I was probably 10 years old. Silent Hill 2 is still my favorite video game. I've played a lot of I've played some AAA horror games over the years, but I've mostly focused on weird little independent horror games. Last year or earlier this year, the PS1 Haunted demo disc came out, and that was really cool. And I played a bunch of different small tabletop horror games. I can tell my internet's being weird. I can't really tell how much y'all can hear me or not.
Well, the good news is we can hear you just fine, but just like a good horror movie, you're frozen in place, but we can still hear you.
Well, at least you can hear me.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Aesthetic that we want in this panel.
And I heard you guys are podcasters, so you can handle being just heard. So we'll get through it. We'll get through it just fine. I think my first exposure to horror gaming was definitely video games. Full disclosure, I do not consider myself a horror fan in the sense that a lot of you do. I'm more a sci-fi fantasy guy, but did get exposed to a lot of horror survival games on the consoles and on the PC very early. I also am gonna, because it's a rule, every chance I get, I'm gonna mention the GameCube's Eternal Darkness, which is a Lovecraft kind of Cthulhu universe video game, which even though it's old, it still is just a fabulous horror survival game. That's my big love with video game horror survival. But also I have played a ton of board games. I collect board games, been playing them forever, and a lot of the best games for a game night party or a social gathering is horror survival games, and we might get into that in a little bit more detail, but we'll see. So what draws you guys, what attracts you guys to horror role playing as opposed to science fiction role playing or fantasy role playing? Anybody?
It's funny.
It's funny. That's okay. That's not where I thought you were going to go.
That's what see. This is I love horror as a genre because it's very relieving to me in a weird way. Um, and I think that kind of it's the same aspect. Well, it's because yes, it is like a terrifying thing to look at on TV or like in media, but like it's a way big different thing of like, well, I know what the monster is in this world, and it's like not just a person that's like me; it's like a vampire, and so like it's a big difference, and so I really enjoy horror for kind of like the release that it gives. And so I
Mm.
think for gaming, especially for like our show, I didn't realize that I even wanted to do like a very horror based show. It just kind of organically happened. But I do think though that it's a whole different kind of game though, especially like we're to go back to video games. Like video games are always intense and like you're very into it and like you like feel zoned in. And then I remember like the first time playing like Resident Evil or this came out later, but like the first Dead Space, not the second two were more actiony, but like that was like the first time I ever had like a full surround system for a game, and that game like terrified me. And there was times I was like, let me play this in the dark by myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go turn on every light in my house, and I'm 25. This is what I'm choosing to do. So I think though it's just like it's such more of an immersive thing when there's like the horror aspect added into like the game. For me personally, it draws me in a lot more.
Okay, we've got to come back to Resident Evil, the game, but I want to hear Shannon's answer. What's the attraction in horror RPG?
I've loved horror since I was like a really little kid. I would read horror short stories, and then I got into like creepy urban legend websites online and stuff like that. So it's just natural for me to be into it. But there's also like some of my favorite just design games, tabletop games or horror games. Like Stephen Dewey designed this game called 10 Candles. Dewey's involved in the zine I'm working on, like full disclosure. But 10 Candles is my favorite horror tabletop game. You physically light 10 different candles on a table, and then like as the game progresses, you snuff them out, and at the end all of your characters die, and you like actually burn your character sheets to do different stuff. And if you like accidentally blow one of them out, then you're closer to dying, so you're very rigid, like you don't want to move, you don't want to laugh. It's just like an entire like physical experience that is really cool, and I've never seen like it's not like that. I'm not like an expert on every type of tabletop game ever, but I've never seen that replicated in other games, and it's so like dour and so scary in a way that I haven't really experienced outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love like horror video games. I love going to Netherworld every year, stuff like that. But 10 Candles, as far as like kind of a sad, emotionally intense experience, I've never had that with other tabletop stuff. So it's like there's some really cool stuff in it.
Yeah, I find it's interesting. It's the only game I know of that comes with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
You got to be very careful.
A lot of fire.
Yeah, and the LARP of that game is just terrible. The fire department hates that LARP. Sorry, I can't help myself.
Just die in the game, die in real life. 10
Die,
Candles.
yeah.
That's how it goes.
That's a rule in every tabletop.
Yeah. So what
game.
happens? So one of the things I think that's worth mentioning as a little aside real quick is that role-playing games and board games are starting to get very creative with their engines. I'd heard about 10 Candles. I love that idea. I haven't tried it, but I can imagine, you've got to turn all the lights out and let the candles go. Must be intense. But the other one that I like is, I forget which game it was exactly, but there was an RPG that every time your character wants to do something, instead of rolling a die, you have to pull a Jenga piece out of the tower.
Ooh.
And you have to play Jenga.
Dread.
Is it Dread? Thank you.
I think it's Dread. Maybe, If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, everybody.
No, that's okay.
Well, I've not played that because I heard about the system after no one could be in the same room together. But like I think that's what it is, though. I think like you pull Jenga pieces.
Mm-hmm.
But that one sounds fun too because I've wanted to try that out. But like I said, like all my tabletop games has been online, to where it's not really like the same. Because like we all have our own Jenga stack.
Right, and then of course, someone will cheat and mute their microphone right before they pull the piece in case it goes. Oh no, it was fine. You guys can't see it.
It's just off camera. You can't see it, but it's
just
fine.
off camera
over here.
But also, I like the suspense that the candles and the Jenga set build. And by the way, none of us are getting any money from Jenga. I love the suspense that it builds. I love that they've built that visceral, physical experience into these horror games, board games, and role-playing games. It's awesome. It's great to see. But also for our Monsterama audience, I would love to see somebody do a game which involves kaiju, and the Jenga tower therefore becomes that building that all the kaiju are trying to eat,
Oh,
or something like that.
they're
Just
attacking.
That's fine.
yeah, it would be a great way to translate that. Also, somebody do that quick. Get back to me with my royalty check. The so let's go back to Resident Evil, the video game. I think this one's worth mentioning, not just because it was so incredibly successful. And how many movies did they make? 17 movie spin-offs or something like that?
17.
50
The 17,
movies.
all 17 of them starring Milo Jovovich, whatever her name is. Um, the Resident Evil games were something that I have a very fond place in my heart for, because at one point in my life, I had an apartment, had a couple of roommates. We were all gamers of various kinds, and I would sit and watch one of my roommates play Resident Evil. I was not going to play that game. I was one of those kids that the controller would fly out of my hands and go through a window during
Mhm.
jump scare. No, you don't want to see that. But he'd play Resident Evil, and I'm sitting there going, okay, first of all, the camera moves on this game are gorgeous. Like, at that point in video games, they hadn't thought that like you could actually put the camera in weird places
Mm-hmm.
to set them. And I'm hoping Joel will comment on this, but like, I jokingly referred to
Mhm.
Resident Evil as a second person point of view, because the camera was like part of what some of the puzzles were. The camera wasn't in a good spot, and you kind of had to figure out how to walk around the corner and not get eaten by the zombie Doberman, because the camera was against you at
Mm-hmm.
that moment. And I just loved the cinematic experience of watching somebody else play that game. So, all right, Joel, you got to back me up on this.
Well, no, yeah, no, I think I agree with you, because like it is. That was, I remember first playing it, and I thought, because I think I was in like, I played Resident Evil 2 first, and then went back because a friend of mine had brought Resident Evil 2 over. I never played it, and then was just like, but like I remember at first being like, why can't I move, like the can't, like why is it like this, like I can't. But then eventually you do realize like that's the point of it, and the game itself is just like terrifying too, especially because like the way you like get better at that game is you just keep dying, and like you realize you're like, all right, well I can't go into the left door because that's an automatic death that I can't get through. And then the right door, I can maybe get through it. But then you realize later, like, nope, you weren't supposed to go to the right door. You go down the hall, then later you go on the right. So it's just like the whole thing is such a brutal way of just like, no, you just have to keep dying over and over again of trial and error. And then like, and that especially too, like like whatever graphics at the time are like, that was like, they looked great. Like the cutscenes were terrifying. The art on it is really creepy. And like I love like all the body horror creatures in it. It's just like such, because like it was like a good mixture of zombies, and yeah, I think that was like really before I mean, zombies have been around forever, but I think before like the really big boom of like zombie media, to where you saw, so like that for me was like some of the first times I remember like seeing stuff of like, oh, where there's like shambling zombies, but there's also like these weird creatures that like, and like as the more of the virus you get, it transforms. So I think the whole game itself really informed a lot of things going forward. And then it's interesting to see the progression of the series too, because then it kind of gets into kind of more of an actiony game. I wasn't as scared as like, I think whenever it actually goes to like a second person over the shoulder game style. What was it, like 4 or 5? I think it was. I wasn't scared, but then the most recent one, it's like straight up like POV, first person perspective, and you are just like fighting these 4 people in a house that will like that you beat, and then they come back, and that game, that one was terrifying. Like I had
Yeah.
to do that in spurts, because I would play it and then I would get so scared, and then my girlfriend at the time really wanted me to keep playing. I was like, well, you go, I'm too terrified. She's like, I will not play this game, I cannot physically. So it's the same thing we were talking about, like the controller. Like I've had people that like, I love watching horror games, I will not play them. I need
No.
to see you play this, but I can't be the person that opens the door.
Yeah, I have to say, Joel, I agree. I saw a Let's Play of the new version of Resident Evil, and I was like, oh, a remake, it'll suck. No, it was good.
It's terrifying.
It
And then they
was
made a
very
VR
good.
version of it. And if you have played that, you have the nerves of a god. Because like that, the game itself, even just like for me turning like the joystick to the left, where I'm like, I know he's gonna be there, I know he's gonna be there, I know he's gonna be. But like the fact that I would have to turn my physical head, I'm like, no, I can't do this. I will die. I will die playing a video game.
So Shannon, is there a horror video game that you enjoyed as much as Joel enjoyed Resident Evil 2?
I will say I am the one who plays the games in my family, and like I'm always the person who no one like my little brother and we used to play games a lot together, and it was always like, Shannon, you have to do it. I don't want to do it. And I'm also the person when we go to haunted houses, I go first. Or first and last are the scariest places in haunted houses to go, and I like
Mhm.
leading the group or whatever. I've played a little bit of the first Resident Evil for Christmas last year or the year before. My mom got my brother the little miniature PS1, you know what I'm talking about, that came with like 20 super old games on it. And
Mhm.
we played a little bit of Resident Evil together, but it's mostly for me, it's Silent Hill, which is like a very less action based and more like very creepy atmospheric horror.
Yeah.
But I think probably a similar experience of like turning all the lights out and play. And we used to like uh there was a point where we couldn't afford a PS2 and we would like rent a PS2 from Blockbuster, so I had no memory card. So I would just have to play it until I had to stop playing. So that was like some of my first Silent Hill 2 experiences before in 5th grade I got a PS2. So
Yeah, I don't think kids today, there I go, I said it. I don't think kids today understand the the sheer delight of getting a memory card for Christmas, right?
mm-hmm.
It's like the
Like
adults are going,
finally my progress.
this is,
You
I mean,
know.
this is what they asked for, and the adults are all going, we don't get it, and the kids are all going, memory card, thank
That's
goodness.
yeah, that's the true horror of old games is that I can't even. It's funny too because I grew up with that. Now you said that and I forgot. Like, oh yeah, you couldn't just like they were like, oh, you like this game that you spent $60 on? Better not turn it off.
Don't turn it off. Turn it off. And so now this brings me into one of my favorite video game paragraphs of all time, which is Eternal Darkness had this thing where when your character started to go insane, the game would bug. Like literally, as if you lost all of your
mm.
sanity, one of the things that Eternal Darkness would do is it would blue screen of death. It would give a
Mm-hmm.
memory reference error on the screen, and it would stay for about 90 seconds. And I know dozens of gamers who didn't get it the first time, jumped up, threw down the controller on the sofa, went over, reset the GameCube, went back in, and found out 2 months later that it was a game effect. That the game when your character went crazy, the game went crazy. It was awesome.
Yeah, I didn't. I did
Really
not play that
cool.
with the same friend that had had like shown me Resident Evil 2. He had a GameCube. I didn't have one for most of the run of that. But like, he had told me about that, and he had said that like if I ever got one, that was one of his favorite games because it literally the whole thing is it's just like it's just screwing with you the whole time and the whole. But I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, because especially too, I didn't realize that it was like Lovecraftian based. If that's it, that's the perfect Lovecraftian game. They're like, oh yeah, you want me to? You want to think your
Hmm.
game system broke? That's funny, right?
Oh yeah. And we did a panel on Lovecraft earlier in the week. We'll have a Lovecraft panel this weekend for Monsterama virtual. And one of the things that I know for a fact is Lovecraft would have loved that. That's how the game made the gamer crazy, not just the character crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Lovecraft would have liked that
Mm.
if he'd understood how it worked. So we're getting close to the halfway point here. I do want to give you guys a chance to talk about your art form, but before we get out of talking about horror gaming, what about board games? Is there a horror board game that lights your fire?
I'm not.
Shannon's going.
Well, yeah. Do you
Well,
have one?
I
Sh-
played Betrayal at House on the Hill, and it's not really scary. It has, yeah, it's really fun, and
Oh, they're reaching
I
this
end
one.
up being the villain every time I play. It's random, but I always end up being the person who turns. That's more like horror tropes. When I was growing up, my mom would buy a lot of I played a lot of board games growing up, and I forget what it's called, but there was like a vampire board game where you would like turn your lights off, whether you blue light or red light on the game, it would change how the pieces looked. And it was like it wasn't scary, especially compared to something like In Candles, but it was really cool. Here, I could probably look it up real fast.
That I did not know that that's a great idea though,
I
that the
thought that
pieces
sounds
would look
cool.
different in different colored lights. That really does capture the
It's
kind
called
of
Vampire Hunter.
vampire hunter. Okay.
Uh,
Well now
yeah.
suddenly Google is going to say vampire hunter is trending. That's a great idea. I hadn't heard about that.
Okay, it's day and night. I haven't played this in forever, but it's like red light, and then you turn it to blue light, and it completely. It's more for like I guess like kids and young teens. Again, it's not scary, but like the creative use of horror tropes and like
Mm-hmm.
vampire
Hmm.
stuff. I remember that was really cool.
Yeah, the way
But yeah, that's
the
my examples.
well, no, but you're right about Betrayal. The way I describe Betrayal to people who haven't played it is that it's a cross between an X-Files episode and a Scooby-Doo episode.
Mhm.
Thank you, thank
Yes.
you, thank you.
I've played Betrayal, and that's the best description I've ever heard.
Okay, we have that on. Joel said it. I have proof. But one of the reasons why I chose those two is because X-Files and Scooby-Doo had the Monster of the Week thing. You know, they had their mythologies, but they also had the Monster of the Week. And Betrayal is the best part about Betrayal, if you haven't played it, is you don't know who the bad guy is and you don't know why they're the bad guy until you get to that point of the game. And then everyone goes, oh, Shannon's the traitor again? What is she this time?
Mhm.
Oh, she's the zombie lord this time. Or she's the plant that eats the house or whatever. It's a fabulous game. It's not really scary, but it is very suspenseful, especially when the traitor starts killing heroes and you're like, okay, I'm married to you, but I hate you right now. Okay, so Joel, how about you? What's the board game
What's
that lights your fire?
Well, that's what I was gonna say because there are like ones like horror tropes. I played Betrayal. I hated myself and kept playing Arkham Horror and spending 4 hours setting the whole game up, and then I would die in 2 hours. I do really, I am a fan of it. I liked it, but I just kind of got burnt out eventually, where I was just kind of like, it's so brutal. And then it's also too if you want to like use some of the expansions and stuff like that. And like every single one of them, they're like, oh, you thought the first one was. I had one game once where I literally in 4 turns we wiped. Like the game was
Yeah,
that's the, like you can do it. You can like we're just
Mhm.
like oh bad card, bad card, bad
yeah.
card. Oh, and then like we did it. I think it was like me and my girlfriend at the time were like playing with some friends, and then like we were like doing like the mental math, and we are like we can't win. They're like well I was like no literally we just
You
the 4 cards we
cannot win.
pulled
Yeah.
in a row
Oh.
we lost this game. Like that's it.
I have to say really quickly, we did not script that I had these board games sitting on the side
I was
here.
supposed to say, I was
It's
supposed to say,
total.
we
It's
I we were
it's
on the
not
call for maybe
scripted.
5 minutes before this, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna bring up these board games. It's like the talk shows. They're like, I have a little antidote.
No, no, no.
But
I got to say the other thing that's really funny about this is that I would hold this box up the whole conversation, but it's freaking heavy. This is
those are yeah. That's like one of the first games that I ever bought. That
it's heavy.
this is the true horror of board games is how much money they cost. That's one of the first games that I bought where I was just like, oh, I need to buy like other boxes to store these tokens in. They did not. But
Yeah.
so like there are like horror themed ones, but there's not like too many that like are like I feel have the same like draw in. But I do think because like I think the horror themed ones are kind of are more fun because it is like especially the ones where like Betrayal's a cool one because you start as a team and then split, and
Hmm.
so then that's always like a fun aspect to it. But like none of them kind of have like that same like ooh this is like legitimately terrifying to me. Um, but I also think because like board games are like, still at the end of the day, like you're still just like a group of friends around a table having like a fun, silly night. So it's kind of
Hmm.
hard to add like a real like, ooh, this is so scary. Anyways, can you hand me some Mountain Dew, please? Like,
Yeah, yeah. There's a legacy version of Betrayal,
ooh,
which it is expensive,
Ooh.
but and it is a commitment because you really
Mhm.
want to get 5 people to commit to play 13 or 14 chapters of Betrayal, and
Wow.
it's the 200-year history of the house, and it's the same 5 families every chapter. So you can actually play the same exact character a couple times in a row if they survive, which they usually don't. The really cool thing about the Betrayal Legacy game, and I'm going to try and do this without ruining it for people who haven't played it. Okay, so if you've played Betrayal a lot, you are not prepared for Legacy as far as the effect it has on you as a Betrayal gamer. I'm in the middle of a Legacy game of Betrayal now. The 5 of us have played Betrayal a lot. We were not prepared. They have done an excellent job of taking their own tropes and turning them sideways and subverting them and making them wrong in game. It's beautifully done. It's beautifully done.
That's awesome.
They've ramped up the paranoia. They've ramped up the gotcha moments. It's not like scary, but it is even more intense and suspenseful than the regular version that I just showed. Okay, anyway, so any last parting shots on board games before we move on to the second half of our wonderful panel here?
I do want to shout out my favorite tabletop game, Blades in the Dark, which isn't like a
Excellent.
straight horror game, but it's like it does have a lot of horror elements, and it's sort of set in like a weird, sad world, and it's just like a crime game, and it's so fun. It's just like I like more improvisation based tabletop stuff. that's still structured. Like I don't want to just play improv games. And this one, just as far as like having a really good time, like having like a fun high while you play it. I love Blades in the Dark.
So
That's just
Blades
gotta
in the
say.
Dark.
I love it. Yeah,
Okay.
the Forged in the Dark system, I think, is the system that it's based in. Scum and Villainy is like the sci-fi version.
Of course it is. That's great.
But yeah, I love that game. Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
It's like I said, they're horror. It's another one. Horror tropes or horror elements or supernatural, creepy elements with like ghosts and stuff in it. More than it being a straight horror game, but it's really fun.
Okay. So then, the two of you are involved with a couple of other folks in a project called Critical Bits. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Joel to give us the kind of the elevator pitch on Critical Bits for our audience here.
What is? I'm trying to remember what we have described it as. It's a teen superhero slapstick body horror anti-fascist comedy role-playing game podcast.
Okay.
So like little backstory is like Shannon and I have known each other for a few years. Prior to the show, running this show, I used to run a show called Ladies Night where it was sketch comedy. That's how Shannon and I met. She had like submitted sketches to it throughout the years, and we just kind of started working together. And then literally I ended that show, was like on about like a 6 to 8 month hiatus just between projects. And just me and Shannon were hanging out at my house one day with a group of people. And I was just like, hey, I really want to start an actual play podcast. You were like the first person I really want to work with. Are you interested? And so we just started talking, and then just were like, all right, cool. So like it was kind of like always the two of us running it together. And then we just started like looking for people, who we eventually found our other two hosts, Paul Byer and Shelby Lee. I just knew, I was like, I just want to do something fun, and I want it to be more comedic focused and production heavy. Like, you know, I want it to be like this isn't everyone, however you want to produce your own show, it's fine. But for ours, if you listen to actual plays, like we cut out like dice rolls, we cut out all this stuff. Like if it's like a first time we're ever using a move, we'll leave in the talk of like, this is how you use it. But if it's just like, yeah, you're using the same thing we use every other episode, it's like that's all cut out. And then we, there's sound effects, there's like backing tracks. We really focus on the story. So that was kind of like where we started at. And then as a group, we kind of like found the tone of it. But like none of us really planned of like, let's make like a horror comedy show. We just made a comedy show, and then and then I accidentally realized throughout the show how much into body horror I was. Also, I didn't really realize what the genre body horror was. Like I knew of it, I didn't know it was its own thing. And then after it was like episode 4 or 5, Shannon, like during the recording, was like, "Oh, you're really into? I didn't know you're really into body horror." And I was like, "Okay." And I googled it that night. I was like, "Shannon's right." But so I think it's just kind of like just our group itself are all very into horror leaning things, and it was just kind of a very natural like flow into it, especially for me as the GM running the game. Like I did it, and everyone's like, "This is wild, I love it," but like I didn't know that this like silly game was also going to have all these horror aspects.
Okay, so before I get on to the question for Shannon, I got to go back and cover a couple of vocabulary terms here.
Yes.
You guys refer to it as AP podcasting, which means actual play.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about, is actual play just role-playing games, or is it wider than that? Because you guys
I think it's kind of that, because like there's people that do like actual play like streams and podcasting that also do stuff with like board games, but like that's harder to do on like a podcast where you're like, I'm moving my character like this, like, so I think we do some like video streaming stuff, but we way more just audio recording. So like I think you can kind of like go in between the two, but you also like for like live board gaming, you kind of have to have like a live recording setup, or at least a recording setup to like show the board. But for actual plays, it's kind of more so of like tabletop role playing games.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clarify that. And of course, we're all familiar with the fact that some of the bigger conventions are starting to sponsor what I guess would be AP streaming or podcasting. I know that like the obvious example is Will Wheaton playing D&D with some other famous people at PAX, and they're recording that. So this is becoming a genre. I just want to quickly ask Joel one more thing about this. Were you pursuing doing that, or was that in your mind when you thought about starting this?
I just wanted to. I always have to have a project going, because I will I'll mentally die if I don't have things to do. And then literally I used to do I did stand up for most of my 20s, some into my 30s. I ran a successful like sketch comedy show where we made over 100 shorts in 3 years. And I literally was like, what's the next thing I want to do? And it just was like, I didn't want to do just a podcast. I wanted to do like a storytelling podcast. I was very inspired, not story wise, but just like by the Adventure Zone, the McElroy brothers. Like I love that show, and that was just like, this is what I want to do. This would be really fun. You can do like a long spanning story, in-depth characters, and so I wasn't really like where I was like trying to be like, oh, this is like a like kind of a genre of media that's like up and coming that I can get in on the ground floor. It literally was just like the next thing I was interested in.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm looking for. I did subscribe to your channel. I'm looking forward to seeing seeing some of the actual plays. The improvised D&D for charity video. I absolutely recommend. It's fabulous that you guys did that. I enjoyed the
Oh, is
heck
that
out
the one
of
with
that.
Branson Reese, or the
See,
two?
now
We did a
you're
couple of them.
quizzing
They're
me.
all
Was the
really
one with
fun.
Tay? See, now you're quizzing me, and I don't have my
Well,
notes
we
from
did
that.
a few. Yeah, we do charity events and streams and stuff too.
Yeah, and that's a fabulous idea because you're mixing several different things together, which lend people to being able to watch you guys play D&D or whatever, and it was just fabulous. I recommend people who are into role-playing games to check this out because it's fabulous. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Shannon, your turn. I need your help with something. When you when you say body horror, I took abnormal psych in college, so my brain goes somewhere very specific, which is probably not what you guys are talking about. I'm hoping I'm wrong. What really is, when you say body horror, what are you really talking about?
The best example is the work of David Cronenberg, the filmmaker. It's like horror coming from your body being like changed or disfigured, or just like something weird going on with your body, stuff like parasites or like malformed um stuff. So like when we were yelling at Joel about the show being body horror, there was like a teenage boy who had like stretchy powers, like Mr. Fantastic powers, and then that went completely out of control, and the house he lived in got taken over by his like his like body stretching out. And there was a point where Joel said, "Welcome to my boy labyrinth," and it was like, okay, there's no turning back from whatever this show is now. And we got Trevor Henderson, who's like a fantastic horror artist. We got him to do the Boy Labyrinth print. And it's just like terrifying, like this like disgusting, like fleshy, weird thing. But yeah, body horror is just sort of like your body being outside of your control, or being hurt, or being like messed up, or like changed in a way. Like
Okay.
some Lovecraft stuff is like body horror, but it's not like cosmic horror. It's just sort of like more like if you've seen like Videodrome, the like hand gun or stuff like that is very much body horror.
Okay. All right. So this is a much wider topic than I thought it was. So so basically, you're talking about any time that you're messing with what we expect from a human physical form, internally or externally, that counts, right? So like you said, Cronenberg. So Jeff Goldblum in The Fly is
Yes,
an
that is
is
another really good example.
that's an obvious mainstream example. Can you give me
Fingernails coming off and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry I asked. So no, me
You're
personally,
like, take me back to sci-fi panels, please.
yeah, this is I need to stretch myself occasionally. I need to get out of my comfort zone. But no, so what would be, Shannon, what would be another, you got another couple of really good obvious examples for folks to start from? The Fly.
The Fly, if you've seen The Brood, the scene where she's like biting into the like womb sac thing is body horror. Me and Joel are big Venture Brothers fans, and I feel like there's some elements of Venture Brothers that are just sort of like what we do in our show too. It's a teen superhero show, but it's like, what are the consequences of having powers? Where would it go wrong? The kind of like disturbing, strange things that would happen from that. And like the version of the Fantastic Four that's in the Venture Brothers is like a very unpleasant, strange version. A lot of the stuff that I would know is kind of obscure, so I'm gonna cheat and Google it. And
I sense Google is our fourth panelist today. That's fine.
Good. Akira is a good example.
Yes, right.
With the body getting of course, like From Beyond and Reanimator.
Yeah. Again, those are
like
Lovecraft
Hostel on
inspired.
here. I don't know if I would count Hostel because I think of it more as like a supernatural thing than just like cutting someone up.
like I don't think I would like count Hostel. That is like a weird
Mhm.
like they're doing, but that's more like just kind of like weird
They
torture
literally list
Yeah.
Lovecraft, Mary
murder
Shelley,
stuff.
Poe,
Yeah, like
lumping them in.
I don't think I would automatically put torture porn and body horror together. I'm
Mm-mm.
sure there's some overlap, but like the first thing I thought of is Evil Dead 2, where he's
Mhm.
being attacked by his own hand.
Yes, wait,
Right,
the
Zach?
bite mark kind of like
Yeah.
it goes down
Yeah,
into
yeah.
an attack zone.
Right, like the evil got in my hand and I had to chop it off. It went
And
bad.
that's
Mhm.
kind of and obviously Evil Dead 2 is a comedy horror because they made Evil Dead, realized that they made like a silly horror, then it's redid a great series. But
Mhm.
that's like, and that's what I was talking about. I mean, I don't have anything in grabbing distance that we've talked
Look
about.
at that, isn't that cool? I need
I'm
to
like,
put this on my
do y'all
wall
want to
underneath
bring up my D mug? Does anyone talk about this?
that.
The mug I got from a thrift store? No, and so Evil Dead's like a very good example of what I was talking about earlier of like where I think horror can be so funny and also
Mhm.
still terrifying. And it's a because I think a part of it too is like, whenever people are like writing these monsters and villains for horror, it's just like they're putting, their own fears and what they hate about themselves on the page. And so it's even funnier to have these like super powerful, menacing, terrifying, omnipresent things just mess up and be stupid sometimes. It's such a and you can still kind of do that balance.
It's like
And
Evil Dead 2,
also,
the corpse with the chainsaw on itself,
yeah.
the headless corpse of his
And
girlfriend.
so
Yeah.
it's so fun, and also too because there's like some like horrors that lean to the root of like the hyper violence and hyper gore and stuff like that. What's the I can't remember his name. No, Peter Jackson. He's like one of his first films.
Brain
Like
Dead, Dead Alive.
Dead Alive, yeah. Like there's
Yeah.
like a scene where he has like a dude's in the basement with a
Lawnmower.
lawnmower and there's
Yeah.
zombies, and literally it's just like for years that movie held the record for like most fake blood used on set kind of thing. So it's just I think
Mhm.
just horror. A lot of people do think of like horror of just like I'm just so terrified, but like it's such an expansive genre that you can really like dip into, and I
Mhm.
think that and now a lot more people, I think horror is getting a lot more of like mainstream attraction, especially with like people like Jordan Peele. He doesn't necessarily do straight horror, like it's changed for like the 3 movies like thriller horror and stuff like that, but like you're just really seeing like, and the same thing with like Hereditary, which I didn't see for years because I freaked myself out, but Shannon constantly told me to watch it, and then I watched it finally this year, and I was like, yes, it is one of not the best horror movies, one of the best movies I've ever seen. So I just think that the genre itself is like really opening it up, and that's what's been fun for our show to kind of like really explore. We have a few fans that have told us like they did not realize how much they were into horror. Like speaking of the Boy Labyrinth, was also weird point about the show. We've had many people say that was the scene because that's in like episode 4. That was the scene where they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna listen to the show for its whole run. And I was like, me saying welcome to my Boy Labyrinth. They're like, yeah, it's hilarious. But that's like, it's just you kind of just realize when you start to get into different horror stuff other than the stuff, because like I saw Pet Cemetery as a kid too young and it terrified me, and I thought that I did not want to see horror movies because I was like 5 and saw a scene of it and I was like, yeah, it was just a bad idea. But like now that I'm like older and like way more into it, it's like it's so expansive. You could do really fun silly horror. There's also like horror that has like very like fun and loving stuff, like monsters just needing friends and they're not spooky. But I
Yeah.
don't know. I do think though for like our show, it's been fun for all of us to kind of really just kind of wildly go between like tones and stuff like that. Because our show will especially go from like we'll have like a really like heavy dramatic moment to then somebody will make a dumb joke and then it will lean into like a stupid riff that turns into like 2 bonus episodes that are like 10 hours in total. And so it's just kind of all over the place. But I just think that like having superhero stuff without like the realism of like horrifying superpowers, that was one of the things that like I've seen it in things before. Weirdly enough, like Incredibles and Venture Brothers were 2 of the first things that I saw that really like showed the other side of
Mhm.
superpowers, and that was one thing that I really wanted to explore when we also the game system. We never said this. We run a game system called Mask, and it is everyone's a teenage superhero. That's like the whole point
There's
of
no
it.
horror in masks. We
There's
put
no
it in.
we run a very, if you listen to our show, we're very rules light and the tone is very different. But the whole thing is just like your teen superhero. It's just like any other role playing game. You can change the settings and tones, but it's all
Mhm.
teen superheroes. So instead of, it doesn't really matter like that you got punched through a building, but it does matter that like your friend doesn't like you. So
Okay, so
Mhm.
Shannon, were all of those adjectives in the initial idea that you guys talked about? Did you start from teen superhero body horror? So I remember you mentioned that the body horror thing kind of snuck up on Joel, but did you really start from?
And well, he snuck it up on us too.
Okay.
Nobody knew it was coming. That's what good body horror is.
Apparently so.
I mean, I knew Joel, and I knew we weren't super close friends, but we were friends, and I'd seen all his comedy stuff, which the sketches they did have elements of like body horror and dark comedy in them sometimes. Not necessarily surprised, but it was definitely a surprise. I mean, luckily we were all fine with it and our stuff, and I think you could kind of tell from hanging out with the people who would be like, I'm out, I can't do this creepy weird stuff, but we all liked it. But no, I had no idea when we started. I thought it was just gonna be like a teen superhero show. I don't dislike teen superhero stuff. It's not really my genre. So when we started, I was like, okay, I'll do this. And then as it went on, it's like, yeah, it's body horror. This is way more my speed. I like this more. So it was good for me.
Okay. So teen superheroes. So Joel, I have to ask, as one game master to another, what's your take on throwing villains at a live recording of an RPG?
I love it. We counted it up once, and this was like probably 10 or 12 episodes back. So, but I don't think I've introduced too many new villains. But I think that throughout we're about to record episode 50, so this was probably around like episode 38 or so. Yeah, it's too many episodes. Not really. It's a good show. We counted up once, and I was just like, I think, how many villains have I made? It was like 52. How many heroes have I made outside of like the main cast? It was like 12. So
Okay.
I love just to bombard with villains, and I think it's very fun. And then also though, that a lot of like the body horror stuff isn't just for villains though. Like, because in the same episode where there was like the boy labyrinth, because it was just like I was experimenting with like, oh, like these are powers going to control, and like, you know, density shifting, kind of like Martian Manhunter and stuff like that, or like Kitty Pryde. It was like the idea of like, oh, well, that's going bad. So like you different parts of your body's density are different. So like you're halfway in the ground and you're screaming, but then like your lungs form back up and then you have dirt inside of them and you're suffocating. And so it's just like stuff like that, where it's like, it wasn't like that wasn't like a superpower that someone could do. It was just like, this is help me. So I think though that with like the villains and stuff, it's very fun just to throw too many villains at people. Like that's it.
We have
and
guests
then,
come on and play villains too. Heroes
Mhm.
are villains. Like we get guests, other people who do improv or podcasting stuff, or people we know, and we ask them what they want to play. So it has been fun to have guest villains too.
Can you give me an example of a guest villain?
Oh, one of the best ones is Branson Reese, who also, I'm going to plug his podcast too. He runs a comedy role-playing game podcast also called Rude Tales of Magic. He came on and played a character called Hoagie Allen, and he was a villain, and it's one of the most ridiculous and chaotic episodes we've ever had.
Excellent. Excellent.
What was it? He rocket and got cursed by a witch, and to get rid of the curse, he would just have be a good person, and he refused. He asked. That's what we had him come on.
Shannon, you blipped for a second there. Do me a favor and repeat the description of our guest villain. Cursed by a witch? I got that much.
He threw a rock at a witch, and she cursed him. And he has like terrible luck, like the worst luck, like supernaturally bad luck. And all he has to do to end the curse is like be a nice person, and he refuses. So he comes on and he's trying to kill Paul's character, because Paul's character has like kind of like mind control powers, and he's underage, and he would get Hoagie Allen to sell him cigarettes at the gas station, and he got fired. So he's coming to kill Jerry, his character. I also really like Chris Wade came on and played the villain New Money, who's like a mean rich guy who has like paper control powers with money. We just sort of like would work with people, and they would come on and do. And Branson also played on a bonus episode a guy named Bone Daddy, who has the ability to control his own bones. Just stuff. It's like I said, body horror comedy. There's a lot going on.
Control
his own bones. That sounds like body horror comedy gold.
But this is just a plug for how funny Branson is. The whole point, it's not that like he can like put them out of his body. He mentally can control and move all of his bones. And a lot of people think that it's normal movement, but it's not. He's not moving his muscles. He's just so that's the whole thing. There's like a line on it where his character has a gun. He goes, I use my bone control to expertly wrap my fingers around my gun, and then I pull the trigger with bone control. Like And it's just, it really fits the tone of our show of literally when we have guests come on, especially too, like ones that like we always ask them what to lean is. Once again, horror and comedy, both very like you can fit a lot into there. And I'll just tell people, I'm like, what kind of, do you want to be a hero or villain? And then what kind of like power set do you want? And do you have any dumb things that you want to do? And I don't tell them anything of like, these are the plot I need you to hit. They tell me, and then I'll be like, cool, let me get back to you. And then I figure out a way to plug them into the show. Branson was one of the only people that we pitched an idea to, and it was just that like, you're a terrible person, you hate Jerry, and I told him like, you know, you're just never gonna come around. Like that's what the only thing I really need you to do is never see their side of it. I can never have you be a good person.
Oh boy, it sounds like a lot of fun. It really does. So we're gonna we're gonna start wrapping up here. I've got one more big question for you guys about the podcast before we have to pay the bills, which I'm sure you can understand. So the thing that I've noticed in, I saw one of your convention panels talking about podcasting. People were asking about microphones and cameras and stuff like that. We don't have time for that. You guys have covered it. What I want to know is, if you've got somebody coming up to you who is a rabid horror fan, RPG fan, and they see what you're doing and they want to do it, is there wisdom to give them about just the basics? Like one of the things I'm thinking of is, and I tell this to people that ask me about my writing, I'm like, if you're expecting to make money, you need to pause and think about that, right? So is there, without getting into the technical details, is there something that you wish you could go back a few years and tell your younger self about this project or projects like it? Shannon, you're thinking about that. Anything come to mind?
What this isn't necessarily something we would change,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also Joel and I were already editors, so we already had the technical expertise like going into it. I had listened to the Adventure Zone as well and Chapo Trap House's Call of Cthulhu series, and those are both very heavily edited with music and sound effects. It's like, even if you don't have money, get these microphones are less than $100 each. They're not like $500 microphones or something. Get individual mics, get like put in music, put in sound effects, and cut it down, because you want to make like a good show that people want to listen to, and not just like a bunch of strangers playing a game. Like if you're really, really charismatic and really, really funny and you just want to do a game, or really, really dramatic, whatever, do that. But my advice is to go more like build a narrative and put the work, because you might not have money, but you have time to learn how to get clean audio and stuff. Like, please don't, if I turn something on and it's like one snowball in the middle of a room full of people and I can't hear anybody, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm too easily distracted. But yeah, that's my advice for it. But we kind of started off doing that, I think.
Yeah.
But again, we had a head start.
So would part of your answer, Shannon, be that that people do take the time to learn enough editing? Because you guys said production heavy earlier. So I know, like I think I know you well enough, Shannon, to know that you're not going to judge people, but
no,
your time in being in the audience for you depends on the quality of the production. So if somebody wants to make their own little thing and just record it for their buddies, this is something I'm stealing from you guys. That's fine, but just don't make me listen to that. But it's something that I've run into. Is I am teaching myself editing currently, and I don't like it, but I really don't like it. I don't see how you guys, anyway, whatever. But the point is that I see a huge improvement in just a little tiny bit of editing. A little bit of production value makes a huge difference in the impact it has on your audience. So I do appreciate that. That's something I get from you guys is there is, like, I think one of you said, don't figure it out while you're trying to get an audience. Figure it out. Joel, would you agree with that?
Yeah, so that's one of the things to kind of like go on that. Obviously, whatever like means of production you can get, try to do the best you can, but just keep in mind like there's a difference. But we've talked about this on other panels. What I would suggest you do, especially to Shannon and I both come from production background. We're both professional video editors, so like as soon as I was like, my main thing is like I was just like, all right, well, instead of just editing the video part, I'll just edit all the audio, and I already know how to do this. So we definitely had a huge advantage. But if you've never edited before and you want to get in this, what you need to do is you need to do a burner campaign. And I'm not talking about like a full, like Adventure Zone's first like full campaign was like 69 episodes. Other ones go like hundreds of episodes. Literally just even if you wanted to like get like a Pathfinder or D&D book, like a pre-made campaign, literally just do something where you can run about like 4 to 5 sessions. That gets your group comfortable. It gets everyone understanding how to speak on a mic. It's big different. How to not talk over each other, and then you as the GM and editor can understand the flow. You can use all these things to like practice editing, and it's going to sound like I'm literally telling you it's a burner campaign, because this should not be your first thing you post. You should not post this up, but then later you do this because you find out if you want to do it, because like you said, editing is a lot of work. You do not realize the scope of it. And then especially too, if you get more into editing, every editor I know has terrible problems with perfectionism, and so you're just going to be like, oh, I learned a new way how to do something better, and I'm going to keep going that. So you really need to know, like, do you want to go down this terrible rabbit hole of listening to the same clip 30 times in a row to never change anything, kind of like. And so I think I literally just like give yourself something that you can practice on, everyone can get comfortable with, especially like I said, if people aren't used to talking to mics. And then later, if you're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have just like done that. If you have this all edited, then you're starting to put out your real show that you know is going to go longer, and you make a Patreon. Just be like, hey y'all, here's 5 episodes of a thing that I literally learned how to cut my teeth on, and just kind of, because that's the thing. No one's going to really want to listen to your really bad first project when you have no audience. But then if you build a little bit of an audience, you're like, by the way, this is what we made as like a tester. People are like, actually, this is cool. I really want to hear like the prototype of this podcast. So just do that. Because I was talking to a friend named Lucas who runs a podcast called Battle of the Seven Dice that we've done some guest work on. It's a really fun D&D podcast you should check out. But I've talked to him about this too, of like, if we kind of like did it differently, of like, because some people have the problem of, they're like, I have 4 seasons of the show out. Season 1's not that great. You should just listen to starts with season 2. Whereas like, well, then you should go delete all of season 1 from your feed. Because if you tell somebody there's 45 episodes but start in episode 13, no one's going to do that. Just delete 1 to 12 if that's really what it is. Re-edit the beginning. Just be like, hey y'all, we this is where we're campaign started. This is like the up-to-date part. Because that's the thing, like, you got to respect, if you want an audience, you need to respect your audience. And so doing things like getting the good mics, or giving yourself the time to like test out and work through something, and have something that like is just throwawayable, that's going to make your come out the gate way stronger. Because if somebody listens to your episode, they're not going to be like, well, maybe in 5 months it gets better and I'll give you time. They're just never going to listen again. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Excellent. Thank you. So I think there she goes. She came back. So you did freeze for just a second. It's all right. Joel was.
It was a good one though. Your hair was like perfectly like up though. So
yeah.
My hair's so long now in quarantine.
Yeah, but you know what? Joel had his steam up, so there's no point in you trying to interrupt. So anyway, so let's do this. Let's get out of here. What I want to do is I want to start with Shannon and ask you, where can our Monsterama audience track you down on the interwebs?
You can find me on Twitter at Plenty of Alcoves. If you go on YouTube and you look up Strucci movies, I got a bunch of videos there. Critical Bits is at Critical Bitcast, and Struggle Session is at Struggle Sesh. And usually I would be paneling at Monsterama every single year. Not this year, hopefully next year. Like in person, I mean. In person,
right. Excellent. Okay, Joel, where can the Monsterama folks track you down on the interwebs?
So I run our Twitter, which is at Critical Bitcast. It keeps everyone up to date on the shows we're doing, if we ever do live streams. If you want to check out the show itself, criticalbitcast.com has all the links to the episodes. I personally want to plug a miniseries I did, especially because we're talking about horror. It's a 6 episodes miniseries called Seasons, using Monster of the Week, and it's got 16 players on it. Very fun, like non-linear narrative story where like groups cross in and out. It's super fun. But if you're a fan of like horror and actual plays, Seasons is amazing. You can go to seasonsminiseries.com or just find the link on Critical Bits. But yeah, so you can just find that. Those are most of the things I do. That's it. And then I've been doing more. Weirdly enough, I didn't start paneling a lot until the pandemic, and now I'm excited for it to go away so I can panel more in person at cons with Shannon.
Absolutely.
So maybe I'll be in person at 2021 Monsterama.
Yes. I have a funny feeling I'm going to talk about having you back in 2021 after this recording. So let me say that I am not possibly going to follow that. You guys know I'm Darren M. Bush, Kindle, short stories, blah, blah, blah. What I do want to do really quickly is remind everybody to not forget that Virtual Monsterama 2020 is benefiting the MPTF, the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which provides temporary financial assistance for needs created or complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. To learn more and to donate, please go to mptf.com. Again, that's mptf.com. And let me also personally say that a lot of the television and movie horror that you are enjoying was made by the people benefited by the MPTF fund. And what we're going to do now is we're out of time. So thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Joel, for joining me on this recorded panel. We're going to say goodbye to Monsterama. Bye-bye, guys. See you soon.
Bye
Monsterama.
bye.